Hey guys, what is going on? So I wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up video and kind of a medium-term review of the supplement Alpha Yohimbine. This is a supplement that is supposed to help with fat loss, and I've been using it throughout the duration of my cuts. And I've been pretty inconsistent in terms of how I've been dosing it. So there were periods during my cut where I wasn't really using it much at all because I kept forgetting and I wasn't in the habit of doing it. And there were other periods where I was using it more, and then I'm using it now. Not as much, but I'm still using it. And so I kind of wanted to talk about what trends I've noticed. And I do have a lot of data. I'm not going to go over all my data in terms of, what my weight has been, what my waist measurements have been, what my calorie, intake has been, calorie expenditure, step count. I have a lot of data, but I have noticed a trend when it comes to supplementing with Alpha Yohimbine, and it does lead me to believe that it is actually having an effect on the amount of fat that I am burning relative to what I perceive my deficit to be. So I'm not really in any period of trying to target a specific deficit. What I am trying to do is be really consistent with my expenditure. So not, having one day where I'm, burning a ton of calories, then another day where I'm not. I'm not going crazy up and down in terms of like how much time I'm spending in the gym. I don't do any cardio on like machines. So all I'm doing is just really tracking my step count, which is just walking. And that's a variable that I try to control as much as I can and just kind of gradually ramp up. And same thing with my calories. I have actually started to increase my calories over the course of this cut as I'm trying to shrink my deficit. And I've noticed that the time periods where I am using Yohimbine, it seems that my deficit in terms of a weight loss perspective, in terms of lowering my waist measurement, it seems that the more Yohimbine I am taking in, the greater acceleration in fat loss I'm seeing. Now, this is interesting because I have had periods where I have dosed Yohimbine not at all. I've had periods where I've dosed it once a day, and I've had periods where I've done it twice a day. And I will say that even though it's very hard to adhere a 2 times dosing protocol because you have to be fasted, and so I would say you want at least like 3 hours of no food in your system. The days and the weeks where I've been able to consistently hit that goal of taking it twice a day, which I'm not saying I recommend, which I'm not saying is even doable for the majority of people, but the time periods where I was able to adhere to that while still sticking to my calorie goal, that's when I saw the most dramatic weight loss, and it seemed to not really line up with the calorie deficit that I seem to be in relative to what I perceived my expenditure to be. And then again, I'm tracking my calories very consistently over this cut. So I've tracked everything that I've put in my body outside of if I have like a 5-calorie energy drink or something like that. I don't count that. But outside of that, I've been pretty strict with how I've been tracking my food. And again, when I'm dosing Yohimbine, specifically Alpha Yohimbine, twice a day, which I haven't done in a while actually, but I was doing that for a good period of time, I was seeing, losses in body weight that just didn't seem to add up mathematically. I was like, how am I losing this rapidly, given what I am intaking in terms of calories? Then I've had periods where I've been a little bit more flat, and I noticed, I was forgetting to dose my Yohimbine in the morning, or, I try and have a dose later in the day as well. Sometimes I would miss both of those. And you know how things go. Once you get out of the cycle of doing it, out of that habit, it can be several days, even weeks, where you're really inconsistent with it. And that's something that I experienced for myself. And that's when I noticed that my weight loss was starting to kind of plateau a little bit. Now, it was still happening. This is not the difference between me losing weight and not losing weight. I've still been on a steady decline. And so when I noticed this, I reintroduced Yohimbine back in at just 1 dose a day, because I found that 2 doses a day is just very hard to adhere to. It's something that if you're like extremely dedicated and you want to do like a short kind of sprint and lose as much fat as possible, maybe it's something you find is worth it. For me, I didn't really like having to space out my meals in the way that I had to be fasted to take that Yohimbine. And so for me, I found that dosing 1 time a day still produced some noticeable difference in terms of a greater deficit seemingly. But, I could just kind of do it 1 time fast in the morning and kind of be done with it. So if you're familiar with the Yohimbine research, it's very limited, and there's pretty much nothing on Alpha Yohimbine, and even regular Yohimbine is very limited. But the one study that people kind of go off of, I think it says that it can make the deficit that you're in be roughly 30% more effective. And they also dosed yohimbine twice a day. Now, they used regular yohimbine, not alpha yohimbine, and the doses that they used were extremely, extremely high, something that I could not adhere to. And so I opted for alpha yohimbine, which again, there's very limited research on what effective dosages are for alpha yohimbine. And therefore, I just kind of went with a dose that I thought would be sufficient, that would kind of cover my bases in terms of, not being too crazy and taking too much, but at the same time doing something that I knew that I could tolerate. And so for me, it does seem to be pretty consistent with that research, with the dosages that I was taking when I was dosing it like twice a day. When I'm dosing it once a day, I feel like it's not as effective as that. Like I'm not getting that same percentage increase. And then when I'm not taking it, obviously it just seems to be relatively normal. Like sure, I've been consistently in a deficit, but it seems like I'm actually losing weight that is consistent with my deficit when I'm not taking yohimbine at all. When I'm taking one dose a day, it seems to be a slight boost. And when I'm taking 2 doses a day, which I don't really think is sustainable for the vast majority of people, but maybe something you could do, for a few weeks or something like that. Well, during that time period, that's when I saw the most dramatic results. And again, seemed inconsistent with the calorie deficit that I was in, meaning it seemed to be upping my deficit seemingly. I don't know what's actually going on, on a physiological level, but it did seem to kind of not correlate with what my tracking was kind of showing in terms of, my calorie intake, which I would consider to be relatively accurate, and then my calorie expenditure, which is very, very hard to calculate. So I don't really go into that, but I just kind of take an average. If I'm very consistent with my step count and I burn a similar amount of calories on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, I feel like I have a pretty good guide of, hey, I'm taking this many steps, I should be burning, this many calories or this much fat per week. And again, I noticed a slightly higher increase in weight loss with 1 dose a day, and then a much higher, like very significant amount with 2 doses. So what is my kind of conclusion with this? I would say if you are taking regular yohimbine, it's going to be very difficult to take enough given the kind of protocol that they've outlined in the studies. It seems like you really have to take very large dosages, which is very hard to tolerate even for me. I found that I couldn't really handle the dosage, and I never even got to it because I just couldn't tolerate even lower dosages. So using yohimbine, unless you're one of those rare outliers who can mega dose it to the degree that they suggest in the studies, and if you can do that and split it in 2 dosages twice a day, I don't really think it's worth going with regular yohimbine. Now, alpha yohimbine, if you can tolerate it, if you take, 3 milligrams, for example, and you can tolerate that, and you do that once a day, I think it's going to have some effect on your fat loss, and it's going to be probably noticeable, but nothing too drastic. If you can have a fat loss sprint where you manage to dose it twice a day, you get, 3 to 4 hours of not having a meal and making sure that you don't have that insulin spike, and then taking, like, for example, a 3 milligram dose twice a day. Hey, if that's something that you can safely do, if that's something that you can tolerate, I'm not suggesting anybody do that, but I think that's really going to be equivalent to what we kind of found in that study, which a lot of people are probably not going to be able to replicate that at the end of the day. But I think that's really where you're going to see like a dramatic, noticeable difference with yohimbine supplementation. If not, if you're only taking it once a day, don't expect anything crazy. And if you can't even tolerate 1 capsule of alpha yohimbine, then obviously don't use it. And it's probably pretty unlikely that you'd be able to tolerate the equivalent dose, which we still don't really know. But in terms of an efficacious dose, seems like the vast majority of people cannot tolerate regular yohimbine very well. And in that instance, I would say kind of a waste of time, not worth doing. And so that's kind of my conclusion there is you'll get a slight boost with, 1 dosage of alpha yohimbine and a pretty dramatic boost, I would say, with 2, but is that something that's really realistic to be able to do? Probably not. So is it a miracle, supplement? Probably not. But if you're going to be fasting in the morning anyway, and you can tolerate, a 3 milligram dosage of alpha yohimbine, or in my instance, I was actually able to tolerate 6 milligrams. If you're able to do that once a day, and you don't really feel any negative side effects to it, I think it will have a meaningful difference in terms of how much fat you can lose. Anything less than that, if you're not able to tolerate it very well, or if you feel like it's, it's very hard to tolerate, but you do it anyway because you want that extra fat loss, I would say in that instance, don't even go for it. I don't think it's going to be that dramatic. And again, that person's not even going to be able to do 2 doses a day, which I think that's really where you're going to get some dramatic differences. And I would love to go back to that, but that's just not realistic to be sustainable. And I did get some extra fat loss during the phase that I was doing that, so I'm glad that I did that. And if you want it to be more aggressive, that maybe is something you can consider, but in a more kind of slow, sustainable cut, probably not something you'd want to do. So hopefully that can help clarify, my experience. And maybe if you guys were thinking about doing it, maybe this puts you off to it. Maybe this makes you want to try it, something like that. But anyway, that's all I got to say about that. I'll keep you updated and I'll talk to you soon.